This election had many firsts and many stories that will be told for generations, but one that's on my mind tonight is about a woman who cast her ballot in Atlanta. She is a lot like the millions of others who stood in line to make their voice heard in this election, except for one thing. Ann Nixon Cooper is 106 years old. She was born just a generation past slavery, a time when there were no cars on the road or planes in the sky, when someone like her couldn't vote for two reasons: because she was a woman and because of the color of her skin. And tonight, I think about all that she's seen throughout her century in America: the heartache and the hope, the struggle and the progress, the times we were told that we can't, and the people who pressed on with that American creed: yes, we can.
Some presidents, when they are sworn into office, inherit a great starting hand. And some presidents are dealt hot garbage. Barack Obama was dealt hot garbage. A war in Iraq, a war in Afghanistan, the worst economic depression since the Great Depression. And the very night of his inauguration, a cohort of Republican congressional leaders gathered in D.C. to commit to a scorched earth strategy of total obstruction. In other words, the country was on fire, and Republicans wanted to step on the fire hose. But Obama, over time, and with varying levels of success, overcame all of these challenges to not just right the ship, but also pass the most meaningful healthcare overhaul in half a century. Let's go. Barack Hussein Obama Jr. was born August 4th, 1961 in Honolulu, Hawaii. His white mother, Stanley Ann, and you can bet she went by Ann, met his black father, Barack Obama Sr., at the University of Hawaii when they were students. They fell in love, got married, and had a child, Barack Jr. What Ann didn't know is that Barack Obama Sr. was actually already married and already a father. Yup, Barack Sr. had gotten married and fathered 2 kids back in Kenya. When an opportunity came along to study in America, he had told his wife, "Don't worry, I'll be back as soon as I complete my education." Then he left for Hawaii, where he met, married, and parented a child with Ann. But then an opportunity came along for Barack Sr. to go to grad school in England. So he told his new wife, "Don't worry, I'll be back as soon as I complete my education," and he left for England. And Anne soon realized that he was not coming back. She was the second wife of Barack Sr. who had been abandoned with a child. That's a pretty tough start. Luckily, Anne had the support of her parents, who helped raise Barack as she returned to school, earned a degree in anthropology, and married again, this time to an Indonesian student who did not abandon her. When the young Barack Obama was 6, his mother and stepfather moved the family to Indonesia, where Obama spent 4 years before returning to Hawaii to be raised by his grandparents. As the son of a white mother and a black father, Obama struggled with race through much of his life. From childhood to the campaign trail, blacks often viewed him as too white, and whites often viewed him as too black. And yet, Obama played it cool and managed to get along well enough with everybody. He had an easygoing nature, he liked basketball, he liked to party, he liked to read, and you know what? Growing up in Hawaii was pretty sweet. Once in college at Columbia in New York, Obama became obsessed with the hardships of the poor. It led him to a career as a community organizer in Chicago, somebody who identifies and solves problems for underserved communities, like paving streets, or signing elderly up for Social Security, or helping housewives advance their education. As one Obama mentor said, it's hard to find good people for these jobs because you have to be really smart to effectively navigate so many different systems. And if you're that smart, you're probably smart enough to realize this is a really crummy job. But Obama had a passion for it, until he got burnt out doing it. Too often, he laid the groundwork for a project that could really help folks in his neighborhood or over there, only for someone in local government to say no. And it made him wonder, what if instead of being on the outside doing all this work and being told no, He was a politician on the inside saying yes. After 3 years in Chicago, Barack Obama said goodbye for now and enrolled in law school at Harvard. Harvard was good for Obama's career, and it was also good for his marriage prospects. Toward the end of his time at Harvard, Obama sat down for a job interview with Michelle Robinson, a law recruiter from Chicago. Barack turned on the charm and landed the job. Then he tried to land a date. After many no's, Michelle finally said yes, but they couldn't call it a date. It was just coffee. It's not like she was going to marry this cocky Harvard boy from Hawaii. 3 years later, they got married. Michelle Obama is an enduringly popular first lady who absolutely hates politics. Hates it. Just wait. The pair have 2 daughters, Sasha and Malia, and they're still together today. Obama ran his first political campaign in 1996 when he was 36 years old. The target, a seat in the Illinois State Senate. When he told Michelle what he wanted to do, she told him it was the stupidest thing he'd ever tried. But she did support him, and he did win. 4 years later, he went for the next rung on the ladder, Congress. But this time he got clobbered, 60-30. Oof. So, when he started talking about skipping Congress and running for the Senate in 2004, his friends, wife, and advisors all thought he was crazy. They even staged an intervention. Barack, you are a black man from the south side of Chicago with no money, no statewide organization, and a funny-sounding name. Here are all of the reasons you are going to lose. Obama listened, let them finish, and then turn by turn told each of them why they were wrong. He was going to run. He was going to win. He was right. But he also got lucky. Obama's senatorial rivals both ended up having more than a few skeletons in their closets that doomed their campaigns as Obama ran on, get this, the idea of hope. True, he did think "yes, we can" was a corny-sounding tagline that he didn't want to say, but Michelle insisted he try it, and man, it worked. Obama rose above his Democratic rivals to become the Democratic nominee for one of Illinois' 2 seats in the Senate. Then, Obama got even luckier. The 2004 Democratic National Convention was coming up, and the Democratic Party wanted Obama to deliver a keynote address. The senatorial campaign hit pause, and this speech became Team Obama's whole focus. The whole nation would be watching that convention. A strong performance here wouldn't just win that Senate seat, it might put Obama on the national radar. Mission accomplished.
Now, even as we speak, there are those who are preparing to divide us. The spin masters, the negative ad peddlers, who embrace the politics of anything goes. Well, I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America.
Obama's 2004 Democratic National Convention keynote address is up there with Ronald Reagan's 1964 Time for Choosing speech as the 2 speeches that more than any others radically transformed the political careers of the men who gave them. The crowd cheered, the crowd cried, media elites cooed, world leaders called to pay their respects. In 16 minutes, Obama turned himself into a future Democratic candidate for president. The only question was when he would run. How about 4 years later? I'm not going to spend much time on Obama's 2008 dark horse presidential campaign here because I have an interview lined up with one of his Iowa field directors to give us the inside story. But in short, Obama overcame a heavily favored Hillary Clinton in the primaries, then beat an experienced John McCain in the general election. Obama ran on hope. He ran on change. He ran against the disastrous war in Iraq. He ran on yes, we can. And he won 365 to 173 in the Electoral College, 69 million to 60 million in the popular vote. And so, on January 20th, 2009, 47-year-old Barack Obama, a freshman Illinois senator, former Chicago community organizer, and native son of Hawaii, a man who had only entered politics 12 years earlier, was sworn in as the first African-American president in American history. Or was he? Chief Justice John Roberts flubbed the oath of office, and nervous lawyers feared Obama's presidential actions might later be challenged, since he hadn't said the exact words laid out in the Constitution. So, a couple days later, Roberts and Obama redid the oath, slower, and nobody ever questioned Obama's legitimacy ever again. That's not true. But what did the world and the country look like when Obama became president? Let's look around. It was bad. It was so bad. The global economy was in meltdown. Greedy bankers had made bad home loans to folks who couldn't pay them off and then repacked and sold those mortgages to other banks around the world. When the house of cards collapsed, it caused the first depression since the Great Depression. Unemployment doubled. The stock market lost half its value. 6 million homes were seized from borrowers who couldn't meet their mortgages. It was bad. The United States was also caught in 2 wars on the other side of the world. 144,000 American troops were engaged in Iraq, where a deadly insurgency was finally nearing its end, and 33,000 troops were deployed in Afghanistan, where a Taliban insurgency was just heating up. And across Washington, D.C., on the very night Obama was sworn in, 15 Republican leaders, including future speakers Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan, were laying a plan of resistance. They would oppose everything Obama wanted to do, every piece of legislation, every idea of foreign policy. They rationed that if Obama succeeded in his presidency, even just a little, Democrats would get credit, not Republicans. If he failed, if they made him fail, the nation would vote Republican in the midterms. Help him and we lose, stop him and we win. Quote, "We've got to challenge them on every single bill," McCarthy said. Nothing for Obama was going to be easy. 1 month before Obama was sworn in, a team of economic advisors trudged through 9 inches of Chicago snow to brief him on the failing economy. "Mr. President, this is your holy shit moment," the lead advisor said before diving into the brief. Obama had known it was bad. He was told it was worse. American businesses and American families were more entangled in the banking system and stock market than they had been on the eve of the Great Depression, aka they were all more exposed to risk. If Obama didn't turn things around, this would be worse than the Great Depression. But they had a playbook on how to dodge it. Government spending. Lots of it. At the end of the day, the strength of the economy is really determined by how much money is flowing how quickly. When people and businesses stop spending, that can cause the economic engine to stall. So what do? You increase government spending to give the engine a jolt and get it running again. This has been the playbook ever since FDR. But how much money would be needed this time? How about $1.2 trillion? If your jaw is on the floor, Obama's political team was feeling much the same way. Congress would never approve that much money, they said. You had to make it smaller. So the economic advisors downsized it by 1/3 to $800 billion. That would prove a mistake. Obama put together an $800 billion stimulus plan that included a slew of Democratic priorities. Yes, there would be increased unemployment benefits, tax cuts, and more money for shovel-ready infrastructure projects like road, bridge, and school repairs. But the plan also threw money at high-speed rail, broadband internet, and other forward-looking needs. When Obama presented his plan to Congress, Republicans balked. Some wanted nothing to do with Obama, that cabal of no. Others were willing to deal, but requested tweaks or objections, to which Obama was not friendly, reportedly saying, quote, "Elections have consequences. I won." He may have been thinking, shit guys, the economy's in free fall, we need this now. Can't you just sign it like Congress did for FDR? There's no time to spare. But the GOP was not interested in writing blank checks. The economy was Obama's now, and he would be blamed for not fixing it. If he didn't want to work with them, they wouldn't work with him. But also, Obama knew that he didn't have to work with them. Democrats held big majorities in both houses of Congress. 3 weeks after Obama was sworn in, the now $787 billion package was passed with only Democratic votes in the House and with all the Democrats plus just 3 Republicans in the Senate. The bill was 50% larger than the entire New Deal. And yet, in hindsight, they should have gone for $1.2 trillion. The recovery would prove far slower than promised, and that would have consequences in the midterms. But that bill wasn't the end of Obama's work on the economy, for the auto industry was also on the brink of collapse. Before he had left office, President Bush had bailed out Chrysler and GM with enough money to limp past Inauguration Day, but that money was running out. American car companies had just reported their worst sales in a generation, down from 8.1 million cars sold in 2007 to 4.6 million cars sold in 2009. They were burdened with expensive pension plans and union contracts they struggled to meet. The math was not mathing. But should the federal government really be in the business of bailing out billion-dollar companies? Why should taxpayers pay because auto CEOs sucked at their jobs? On the other hand, what would the cascade effect be if the American auto industry was allowed to fail? There were tens of thousands of jobs in the network of suppliers and vendors who depended on the auto industry. Some regions could see 24% unemployment if the auto industry failed. Should all those folks suffer because GM didn't know how to make a Corolla? Despite being warned that an auto bailout would be massively unpopular, Obama felt he had to do it to save American institutions, pride, and most importantly, jobs. He lent GM and Chrysler $80 billion. But there were strings. GM's CEO had to resign, and Chrysler had to merge with Fiat. Both were ushered through planned bankruptcies that let them restructure operations, debt, and labor costs. The American auto industry was saved. But the healthcare industry was what everyone was talking about. Let's talk about Obamacare, aka the Affordable Care Act. 45 million Americans lacked health insurance in 2009, and those who had it often held policies that sucked. What's that? You broke your arm? Well, we'll think about reimbursing you, but in the meantime, your rates are going to go up. Thanks. As a result, or underinsured Americans often avoided getting medical treatment at all until minor issues had ballooned into medical emergencies. Expensive medical emergencies. But because ERs couldn't turn you away if you couldn't pay, well, you now spent your life in debt. And in the meantime, everyone else at the hospital had to pay a little more to cover the bills you were unable to meet. It was awful for everybody, but Democrats had long held a dream of how to make it better. Universal health care, aka a system where everyone pays a bit more tax and gets free health care in return. Harry Truman had called for universal health care in 1945, the same year that England and Belgium created their national healthcare systems. But where England and Belgium succeeded, Truman failed. LBJ picked up the baton in the 60s and created Medicaid and Medicare in 1965, granting healthcare to millions of poor and elderly Americans. But the great majority still depended on private insurance, either from their employers or bought themselves, or they went without insurance and prayed for good health. Bill Clinton tried to finish the job in 1993, but was so resoundingly defeated that it broke his presidency. Carter also made an attempt and fell short. And so, as Obama approached the challenge in 2009, he hoped to be more a Lyndon and less a Truman or Clinton or Carter. The good news for Obama was that everyone seemed to agree we had to do something. Both Obama and McCain had run on healthcare reform. Everyone agreed the system sucked. But while liberals dreamed of taxpayer-funded universal healthcare, conservatives dreamed of federal subsidies for private insurance, aka funnel more money to those fat check-writing insurance companies. Despite Democratic majorities in both chambers, Obama did the math and realized the liberal dream was not going to happen. Democrats were just as good at accepting insurance donations as Republicans were, and a single senator, Democrat-turned-independent Joe Lieberman, killed a universal healthcare option after receiving $1.1 million from the insurance industry. So, Obama tried to find a silver lining. If he couldn't get the liberal dream, well, maybe he could get a bipartisan win instead. He could pursue the conservative plan with a few liberal modifications. The conservative plan, after all, had been piloted by Republican Governor Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. Like Romney's plan, Obamacare penalized businesses that did not insure their employees. It penalized citizens who did not purchase insurance. It subsidized insurance for Americans earning up to 3 or 4 times the federal poverty level. It helped pay for preventative services. It banned annual benefit caps, and it allowed children to stay on their parents' insurance until age 25 or 26. These are all the ways that Obamacare was just like or very similar to Romneycare in Massachusetts. The main difference was that Obamacare also expanded Medicaid eligibility to 138% of the poverty level. So, Republicans were going to get almost everything they wanted in healthcare reform, and yet, remember that dinner of opposition? Republicans refused to accept the win. They didn't want it. These were early days, and Obama still didn't know about the whole say no to everything plan. So even though he had the Democratic votes to quickly pass almost anything he wanted, he decided to take it slow and let everyone in Congress go home and talk to their constituents about it instead. He thought Republicans would come around and vote for the bill if they went home and heard from constituents who wanted reform. Any change is better than bad change. This is the Republican plan. But that's not quite what happened. Instead, conservative media attacked the bill relentlessly, claiming it would introduce death panels or hand out mandatory abortions. Opponents spent $235 million to try and convince Americans the bill was a bad idea. A political movement called the Tea Party swarmed town hall meetings, hardening Republican resolve and making even some Democrats squeamish. Political advisors told Obama that Americans thought it was irresponsible to introduce an expensive new healthcare plan when the economy was still reeling from the financial crisis. When Obama addressed a joint session in Congress to advocate for the bill, a Republican backbencher interrupted him to yell, "You lie." But, well, Democrats did have big majorities in Congress. Obama had the votes. In November 2009, the Affordable Care Act narrowly passed the House, 220 to 215, though 38 Democrats had joined 177 Republicans in voting against it. 7 weeks later, the Senate narrowly passed its own version with 60 votes, just enough, the exact number you needed, to avoid a GOP filibuster. Obama thought victory was in reach. Because the two bills were slightly different, the last step was for the House and Senate to negotiate some tweaks to make them identical in a process called reconciliation, and then each chamber would vote again to adopt the amended bill. But it had already passed once, so it would pass again, right? And that's about when a Senate special election in Massachusetts blew Obama's dreams apart. Democratic Senate icon Ted Kennedy had died the previous summer, and in the special election to replace him, a Republican former underwear model shocked his hapless Democratic opponent to win Ted's seat. With that one upset, Senate Democrats lost their veto-proof majority. Republicans smelled victory. If any changes were made to the Senate bill during reconciliation, Republicans could mount a filibuster that Democrats could not break. blocking a vote on the bill. Unless, what if no changes were made to the Senate bill? Obama's team convinced Democrats in the House to forego the usual reconciliation process and just pass the Senate's bill as it was. Sure, there were things the House wanted to change, but once legislation had been passed and signed, it could later be amended through spending bills that only required 51 votes, aka the filibuster could be avoided. Yeah, our political system is archaic and weird. Republicans called it a run around the rules, but the strategy worked. On March 21st, 2010, House Democrats passed the Senate's version of the Affordable Care Act. 3 days later, Obama signed it into law. And yet, the fight wasn't over. 26 states sued to challenge the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, specifically a stipulation that Americans must buy health insurance. Remember, the penalty if you didn't have it. The rationale behind this penalty is that if young and healthy Americans did not buy health insurance, there would not be enough money in the system to take care of the sickly and elderly. Young, healthy people needed to pay in for the conservative model Obama had embraced to be financially viable. And frankly, same thing if you did a national system. You'd still have poor people paying taxes to healthcare more than they were getting out, while the older people took out more than they put in. But can the government force Americans to buy healthcare insurance? The Supreme Court said no, but also yes. What? 5 conservative judges agreed that the government cannot force Americans to buy health insurance. But one of the justices, Chief John Roberts, then joined the 4 liberal justices to rule that the government does have the power to tax people. So if you think of the penalty for not buying health insurance as a tax, yeah, you can do that. The argument was so convoluted that as Obama watched the TV in the White House, both Fox and CNN initially reported the Affordable Care Act had been struck down, shocking Obama until an aide ran into the room and told Obama that it had actually been upheld. Fox and CNN had it wrong. Whoa, emotional roller coaster. And yet, the fight still wasn't over. All that grassroots anger that had been whipped up over Obamacare, the Republicans rode that plus a sluggish economic recovery to massive midterm gains. I'm talking the biggest electoral swing in House membership since 1948. Once Republicans held the House, everything became a proxy battle for Obamacare. Want us to pass a budget? Not unless you dismantle Obamacare. Want us to raise the debt ceiling? Not unless you dismantle Obamacare. And Obama struggled to figure out what to do. A 2011 fight nearly led the nation to default on its debt, which would have caused a financial meltdown worse than 2008. And a 2013 fight shut down the government for 16 days. But Obamacare did survive, and its popularity increased over time. While the Affordable Care Act almost always polled below 50% approval during Obama's terms, 64% of Americans approve of it today. Obama and Biden continued to tweak and improve the law, reducing premiums, expanding tax credits, and so on. 41 states have now used the ACA to expand Medicaid, with only 9 deeply Republican states refusing to accept more federally funded medical care for their poor. By September 2024, nearly 50 million Americans, 1 in 7, had received their health care through the Affordable Care Act. That said, Americans do still pay more money for worse results than any other country in the world, so Obamacare was a win, but it wasn't victory. So that's Obamacare. And we've already talked about the Depression, which means there's one topic left to dive into: Obama at war. Obama inherited 2 wars when he came into office, which he thought of as the dumb war in Iraq and the good war in Afghanistan. Remember, the Afghan war had started after Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden and operating out of Afghanistan, had struck the United States by flying hijacked airliners into the World Trade Center buildings in New York and into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., killing 2,977 people. George Bush, president at the time had demanded Afghanistan's government, the Taliban, turn bin Laden over. When the Taliban said no, he invaded, toppling it quickly and standing up a democracy in its place. But Bush never did capture or kill bin Laden. He never did wipe out the Taliban, and he never did secure Afghanistan. The Taliban regrouped in neighboring Pakistan and began a slow and steady insurgency against the United States in Afghanistan. Bin Laden disappeared, and the American-backed Afghan democracy grew wobblier by the day. By the time Obama became president, the Taliban was active again in 33 of 34 Afghan provinces and was launching more than 7,000 improvised explosive device attacks every day. Obama wanted to win that war. He wanted to get bin Laden. That was his good war, and he would do what it took to win it to a degree. Iraq, on the other hand, was the dumb war. George W. Bush had ordered the invasion of Iraq after claiming the country's dictator, Saddam Hussein, a terrible person, was secretly developing weapons of mass destruction. But the U.S. never did find that evidence, so it became a war to turn Iraq into a democracy. This backfired badly. Fighting broke out between Sunnis, Shiites, and Kurds. American troops overstayed their welcome, and al-Qaeda tried to establish an Islamic State of Iraq. It took a massive troop surge and some luck to quell the violence. As Obama entered office in 2009, the dumb war in Iraq was already dying down, with most American troops scheduled to withdraw by 2011. The only question was how many would stay. The answer, it turned out, was 0. Obama didn't really want U.S. forces in Iraq, and Iraq didn't really want them there either. So an agreement for forces to stay was just never reached. The American presence in Iraq ended in 2011. For now. In Afghanistan, Obama took a different approach. After ordering a thorough review of Afghan strategy and getting seriously ticked off over a series of unflattering press leaks from the military, Obama surged 30,000 troops to Afghanistan on top of 10,000 he'd already sent, more than doubling the American commitment from what he had inherited. He gave the troops 2 years to accomplish their mission of strengthening the Afghan army and weakening the Taliban. They didn't fully accomplish either, but this surge was ultimately overshadowed by another development in 2011, the killing of Osama bin Laden. Years of searching by the CIA had led the United States to a 3-story compound surrounded by a 12-foot wall outside Abbottabad, Pakistan. Bin Laden's personal courier was there. Everybody knew that. There were also women, children, and a very tall man who never exited the compound's walls. But was he bin Laden? Nobody could say. Nobody got a good enough look. Multiple attempts were made to confirm it, including sending a fake vaccination program to get DNA samples from children, but none of it was conclusive. Odds were 50-50. What should Obama do? Should he spend more time watching for clues? Should he drop a bomb and destroy the whole complex? Should he raid it with Pakistan or go it alone? Obama, he ruled out dropping a bomb. A strike that left no body would birth conspiracy theories that bin Laden was still alive. And nobody wanted to tell Pakistan. The compound was less than 2 miles from Pakistan's premier military academy. If bin Laden was there, someone in Pakistan's government just had to be aware and protecting him. What's left a covert raid as the only option for action. This was a risky proposition. Everyone remembered the Black Hawk Down incident during Clinton's administration, when 3 Black Hawk helicopters were shot down and 18 Americans killed in Mogadishu in 1993. And some could remember Jimmy Carter's disastrous attempt to rescue American hostages from Iran when helicopters and planes collided in the Iranian desert, killing 8 servicemen in 1980. If this went wrong, it could imperil Obama's presidency, damage American prestige, and cost American lives. Obama listened to all of the concerns, and then he said, go for it. 24 Navy SEALs and specially equipped stealth Blackhawks crossed into Pakistan airspace and infiltrated the compound. The mysterious tall man was shot and his body taken to an airbase in Afghanistan. It looked like him, all right. It looked like bin Laden, but the best way to confirm it was to quickly check how tall he was. That's when the troops realized nobody had thought to bring measuring tape. So a soldier known to be bin Laden's height was told to lay down next to the body to confirm it, prompting Obama to say, "We donated a $60 million helicopter to this operation. Could we not afford to buy a tape measure?" It wouldn't be necessary. The American military had finally found and killed Osama bin Laden. The terror leader's body was dumped at sea. Hooray. If that was a high watermark of Obama's foreign policy, it might have been the only one. In Obama's eyes, American prestige had been badly damaged by the Bush administration. With its swagger and disregard for international opinion, the Muslim world had an especially low opinion of the United States after witnessing the mess it had made in Iraq. In an attempt to course correct that, Obama took one of his first international trips to Cairo, where he called for, quote, a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world. He also said, "I do have an unyielding belief that all people yearn for certain things. The ability to speak your mind and have a say in how you are governed. Confidence in the rule of law and the equal administration of justice. Government that is transparent and doesn't steal from the people. The freedom to live as you choose." The result of those words was probably not what Obama had in mind. 18 months later, a Tunisian man lit himself on fire in response to his government's corruption, sparking a string of Arab protests, revolts, and civil wars across the region. To be clear, this was not all because Obama had said some words in Cairo. The Arab street was frustrated by the leader's wealth, Western ties, and corruption. But Obama's words did seem to offer support for trying to tear it all down. After all, he had called for Arabs to have, quote, the freedom to live as you choose. Did that mean he had to support these uprisings? Or was the dictator he knew better than the chaos that would follow if they fell? These questions turned from philosophical to life or death in a hurry when Egypt's dictator, who also happened to be a longtime American ally, tried to put down his country's protests with violence. Obama was asked if he supported the protesters. Obama said regime change should happen now, and 10 days later, that Egyptian dictator was deposed. But what came next? Egyptians elected a leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, which has ties to terror organizations like Hamas, and is itself considered a terror organization by 5 Arab countries. 2 years later, the Egyptian military deposed that guy in a coup and gunned down 1,000 of his peacefully protesting supporters to restore a government friendlier to the United States and less friendly to the region's terrorists. It was a brutal lesson on how tragic geopolitics can get. But it wasn't the only brutal lesson the Arab Spring provided. In Libya, 42-year dictator Muammar Gaddafi found his regime on the ropes as protesters and rebels rose up against him. When he threatened to slaughter the disloyal civilians, Obama partnered with Europe to launch a bombing campaign to defend the civilians. Operating from behind this barrier of protection, the rebels toppled Gaddafi in a month, but peace did not follow. The rebels fractured as fighting broke out among them for control of the now leaderless Libya. Tens of thousands of civilians died in the fighting, and thousands more fled across the Mediterranean to Europe, destabilizing Europe's democracies. Obama was left to wonder, should he never have gotten involved at all? Yet Syria was even worse. When Syrians took to the streets in protest of their dictator, Bashar al-Assad, Assad responded by massacring them, and a full-blown civil war erupted. Obama called for Assad to step down, but Assad ignored him. Obama said Assad would cross the red line if he used chemical weapons on his own people, but Assad ignored that too. On August 21st, 2013, Assad fired rockets full of sarin gas at a neighborhood friendly to rebel forces. Hundreds of men, women, and children were killed. Obama's red line had been crossed. What was he going to do about it? Turns out, nothing. Obama had seen intelligence that some of Syria's rebels were extremists worse than Assad. What if he hit Assad? Assad fell, and those extremists filled the vacuum. What if he got another Libya, a broken state where terrorists found safe haven, arms proliferated, and civilian life was cheap? Obama talked himself out of the strike, but he didn't want to look weak, so he chose a way out that absolutely made him look weak. He publicly asked Congress to approve a response in Syria, and Congress overwhelmingly said no. Republicans said no because that's what they always said to Obama, and Democrats said no because they didn't want to get involved in another war in the Middle East. And so Assad faced zero consequences for his actions. Obama was rebuked by Congress, and his threats were exposed as meaningless on the world stage. And his caution didn't even avert his greatest fear, the rise of a radical Islamist terror government in the Middle East. Less than a year later, ISIS, the Islamic State of Syria, screamed into the headlines with an invasion of Iraq. You may remember that ISIS got a brief mention in that George W. Bush episode. During the height of the Iraqi insurgency, the local al-Qaeda cells merged with other Iraqi terror groups to declare an Islamic State in western Iraq. They didn't just want to be terrorists anymore. They wanted to be a caliphate, a movement that united all of Islam under one banner to wage holy war against the West. Instead, they immediately wore out their welcome. Turns out, people don't like being strung up and murdered when they don't practice religion the exact same way you do. Western Iraqis turned against this young Islamic State and worked with the Americans to evict it from Iraq in 2007. But it didn't die. It fled into neighboring Syria and hid and evolved. When the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011, the Islamic State was one of the rebel groups Obama had worried about when he had stayed his hand after Assad's chemical weapons attack. He knew they were out there, and he didn't want to do anything that would help them. But they didn't need his help. They were doing just fine. On January 1st, 2013, the renamed Islamic State of Syria, ISIS, caught the world's attention when it invaded Iraq from the neighboring Syria and conquered large stretches of the western desert. ISIS had recognized that Iraq's government was weak and without any American troops to protect it, far more vulnerable than the rest of Syria was, so they'd gone for the easy target. At first, Obama and the Iraqis didn't take the incursion very seriously. The deserts of western Iraq are a big space with not much going on. Okay, rule the sand. What do we care? When asked about the Islamic State, Obama scoffed, calling them a JV squad. It's not like they had captured a major Iraqi city. 6 months later, they captured a major Iraqi city. Mosul is the second largest city in Iraq and a major oil hub on the Tigris River. In June 2014, ISIS captured it. Just like that, ISIS controlled a third of Syria and 40% of Iraq, and its rule was brutal. ISIS massacred minority males and forced minority women to become brides to its soldiers. It was inspiring terror attacks well beyond its borders, like an airline bombing that killed 224 in Egypt, a night of terror assaults that killed 300 in Paris, and a gay nightclub shooting that killed 49 in Orlando. Obama was not calling ISIS the JV squad anymore. Under pressure for having underestimated the threat and for having not stood up to Assad, Obama finally and reluctantly went all in, sending Special Force commandos to train and organize Allied resistance on the ground and ordering 8,000 airstrikes against ISIS targets over the following year. ISIS never stood a chance. At the end of the day, ISIS was still a bunch of dudes riding pickup trucks and carrying Kalashnikovs. It controlled a lot of desert and a lot of isolated cities, which meant long, uncovered highways. Anything on the roads between those cities was easy pickings for the U.S. Air Force. By the time Obama's end of term approached, ISIS was in full collapse. Only mop-up duty remained for the president who would follow. That's right, 8 years had passed, and Obama's legislative accomplishments were disappointingly few. As it dawned on Obama that congressional Republicans would never let him get another win, he started trying to do more things without them, like creating the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, or DACA, in 2012. The idea being, if you were brought into the United States as a child and grew up here, should you really be deported back to a country you never knew? let's not do that. Liberals loved it, conservatives hated it, which was par for the course with anything Obama desired. But what must really have irked Obama was who the nation picked to replace him. At the end of his 2 terms in office, Obama endorsed his former Secretary of State and one-time Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton, for president. In a shocker, she lost the Electoral College, despite winning the popular vote, to Donald Trump, a man who advanced conspiracy theories and lies about where Obama was born and whether he was a legitimate president of the United States. Obama had been elected on the promise of uniting a divided country. He had failed. At the end of his term, the country was more divided than before. Perhaps the promise had been too big, or perhaps he had no playbook for an increasingly fractured political media ecosystem where it was all too easy for people to hear what they wanted to hear and hide from the truth. On January 20th, 2017, Obama left the White House for the last time. So, how had the United States and the world changed during the 8 years of the Obama administration? A number of new technologies were introduced that are ubiquitous today. Drones, artificial intelligence, virtual assistants, Uber, and modern smartwatches all launched or made significant advances in their capabilities. Fidget spinners took off in 2015, and everything from scooters to cars became rentable with the click of an app. Domestically, the Black Lives Matter movement organized in response to increased awareness and visibility of police brutality against black minorities as every phone turned into a camera. And a string of tragic shootings, from the Pulse nightclub to Sandy Hook Elementary and a Charleston church. Hundreds of Americans were killed, many of them children. Demand for gun control increased. Obama tried to act on it, but as was so often the case, liberals said yes, conservatives said no, and the no's had it. Internationally, Russia launched its first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, seizing the eastern part of the country and the Crimean Peninsula, setting the stage for the larger war that now rages today. The United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, which hasn't really worked out for them the way they hoped it would. And I also must say, it's really weird reading and writing about the Obama administration and knowing that some of the biggest deals of the time, like negotiating a denuclearization deal with Iran and a climate change pledge in Paris, were immediately abandoned by Obama's successor. It's almost not even worth mentioning them. So much hard work for nothing. Obama stays largely out of the limelight between presidential elections these days. He'll campaign for the Democratic nominee every 4 years and focus on his charities and family in between. When he looks at the Trump administration, so much a reaction to his own election, he wonders if his time had come too early, if the country hadn't been ready for a black president after all. If you're going to remember 4 things about Obama, that's right, I'm giving it 4. I recommend: first black president. He led the United States out of its first depression since the Great Depression. He ordered the raid that killed bin Laden. And he passed the first major healthcare reform in 45 years, expanding insurance coverage to an additional 20 million Americans. As for a lesson in leadership from Obama, be wary of undercutting policy experts for political expediency. Obama's presidency was dogged by a slower-than-promised recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. Remember those economic advisors who insisted $1.2 trillion of stimulus would be needed, only for the political experts to slash it to $800 billion? Yeah, that slowed the recovery, and the slowed recovery contributed to Democrats losing the House and the Senate. And without the House and the Senate, there was little more Obama could do. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Abridged Presidential Histories. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you'd like to support the show, you can look it up on Patreon or go directly to www.patreon.com/abridgedpresidentialhistories. This helps me buy books and pay to host the show. The music in today's podcast is a public domain recording of the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. The primary biography for today's episode was Obama, The Call of History by Peter Baker. In our next episode, what was it like to be on the inside during Obama's dramatic 2008 Dark Horse campaign? Chelsea Walliser, Iowa caucus field director from that campaign, joins me to talk all about it. That's next time on Abridged Presidential Histories.